A big room filled with people. Some are talking quietly, some are flipping through papers, and others are just sitting there waiting for something to happen. This is a courtroom, a place where judges, lawyers, and regular people come together to figure out what's right and what's wrong. It's a serious place, but sometimes, it can feel like any other busy room. Today, we're going to tell you a story that happened in one of these courtrooms. But this isn't just any story, it's about a boy named Marcus Johnson. And trust me, his story is one you won't forget. It was just another day in court for Judge Harold Grayson, or so he thought. The courtroom buzzed with its usual hum of murmured conversations and shuffling papers. People were moving around, whispering to each other, or reading documents. Everything seemed normal. Nothing special was happening yet. But then, someone caught the judge's eye. A quiet teenager sat at the defendant's table. His name was Marcus Johnson. He looked different from everyone else in the room. Most people in court dress neatly, like they're trying to make a good impression. But not Marcus. He wore an oversized hoodie that looked too big for him. His sneakers were scuffed, as if he'd been wearing them for years. His hands were clasped tightly together, and his head was bowed down, almost like he was trying to hide. Marcus didn't look like someone who belonged in a courtroom. In fact, he looked like a kid who would rather be anywhere else. Maybe playing video games at home, hanging out with friends, or even doing homework. But here he was, sitting in front of everyone, looking small and quiet. And Judge Grayson? Well, he wasn't shy about making assumptions. When the judge saw Marcus, he didn't think, I wonder why this young man is here. Instead, he thought, oh great, another kid wasting my time. The judge muttered under his breath as he flipped through Marcus's file. What did you do this time? He said, shaking his head. Graffiti? Shoplifting? You see, Judge Grayson had seen plenty of kids like Marcus before. Kids who got into trouble for silly things like spraying paint on walls or stealing candy from stores. To the judge, Marcus looked like just another troublemaker. Someone who didn't care about rules and ended up in court because of it. But here's the thing, Judge Grayson was wrong. Very, very wrong. What the judge didn't know, and what no one else in the room suspected, was that Marcus wasn't there for any ordinary reason. Sure, he was accused of something. But his story wasn't simple. It wasn't about graffiti or shoplifting. It wasn't about being lazy or disrespectful. No, Marcus's story was much bigger than that. And by the end of the day, everyone in that courtroom, including Judge Grayson, would realize they had made a huge mistake. Let's take a moment to talk about Marcus. Who is he? What's his life like? Why is he sitting in this courtroom today? Marcus is a teenager. He's not loud or flashy. He doesn't try to get attention or stand out in a crowd. In fact, most people don't notice him at all. That's because Marcus prefers to stay quiet. He likes to listen more than he likes to talk. And when he does speak, his words are careful and thoughtful. Marcus lives in a neighborhood where life isn't always easy. There aren't many parks or libraries nearby. The schools aren't the best, and some kids drop out before finishing high school. But Marcus is different. Even though his surroundings might make things harder for him, he works hard every single day. He studies late into the night, teaches himself new skills, and dreams of doing something amazing with his life. One of Marcus's favorite things to do is work on computers. He loves figuring out how they work, solving problems, and learning new tricks. To him, computers aren't just machines, they're tools that can change the world. Marcus spends hours tinkering with them, teaching himself everything he can. He's really, really good at it. So good, in fact, that most adults wouldn't believe how talented he is unless they saw it with their own eyes. Now, back to the courtroom. As Marcus sat there, waiting for the judge to call his name, he kept his head down. He didn't look at anyone. He didn't fidget or move around. He just stayed still, like a statue. Some people might think he was scared or nervous. But Marcus wasn't either of those things. He was calm. Focused. Ready. Meanwhile, Judge Grayson was growing more impatient by the minute. He glanced at Marcus again and sighed loudly. "Another kid," he muttered. "Always the same story." The judge didn't bother to ask questions yet. He didn't try to learn anything about Marcus. Instead, he judged him based on how he looked. On his clothes. On his silence. And that's a big problem, isn't it? Because when we judge people based on appearances, we often miss the truth. What Judge Grayson didn't realize was that Marcus wasn't just a quiet teenager. He wasn't just some kid who got into trouble. He was smart. Really smart. Smarter than most people in that room, including the judge himself. Here's a question for you: have you ever been underestimated because of how you look or act? Maybe someone thought you couldn't do something because you were too young, too quiet, or too different. If that's happened to you, you know how frustrating it feels. You want to prove them wrong, but sometimes, it's hard to find the right moment. Well, Marcus was about to get his chance. And when he did, everyone in that courtroom, including Judge Grayson, would never forget it. So, let's recap. We have a judge who thinks he knows everything. We have a quiet teenager who seems like he doesn't belong. And we have a mystery: why is Marcus in court? What's his real story? Is he guilty, or is he innocent? Stick around, because the answers are coming. But first, let's set the stage for what happens next. The tension is building. The conflict is growing. And soon, the truth will come out in a way no one expects. Before we move forward, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this story from? Are you at home? At school? Somewhere else? Let me know in the comments below. Before we dive in, let me know where you're tuning in from in the comments below. Let's go back to that courtroom again. Picture it in your mind: rows of wooden benches filled with people waiting for their turn to speak or hear what happens next. The air smells faintly of old paper and polished wood. There's a low murmur of voices, some whispering nervously, others chatting casually as if they're at a coffee shop instead of a serious legal setting. At the front of the room sits Judge Harold Grayson. He's an older man with gray hair and sharp eyes that seem to judge everyone instantly. His black robe makes him look important, like a king sitting on his throne. But unlike a kind king, Judge Grayson isn't known for being patient or understanding. In fact, many people say he's quick to snap, especially when dealing with younger defendants. Today, Judge Grayson looks tired. Maybe he's had a long week. Or maybe he's just bored. Either way, he doesn't seem interested in whatever is happening in his courtroom. As he flips through Marcus's file, his face shows annoyance. "Another kid," he mutters under his breath. "Always wasting my time." Now, let's talk about Marcus again. Remember how quiet he is? How still he sits? Imagine him sitting there, surrounded by strangers, feeling all their eyes on him. Most kids in his position would feel scared or nervous. They might fidget, bite their nails, or glance around the room constantly. But not Marcus. He stays calm. Still. Like a rock in the middle of a rushing river. Why does Marcus act this way? Is he brave? Is he used to situations like this? Or is he simply good at hiding his feelings? We don't know yet, but we will soon. Marcus isn't just any teenager. Sure, he might look like one of those kids who blends into the background. You might walk past him on the street without noticing. But inside, Marcus is different. Very different. He grew up in a neighborhood where life isn't always fair. Some kids drop out of school because they think education won't help them. Others get into trouble because they don't see another way out. But Marcus chose a different path. From a young age, he loved learning. He read books whenever he could find them. He asked questions that made adults stop and think. And most importantly, he never gave up even when things got tough. One of Marcus's biggest passions is computers. He loves everything about them, how they work, how they connect people, and how they can solve problems. When he was little, he used to take apart old electronics to see what was inside. At first, he didn't understand much. But over time, he taught himself how circuits, wires, and software worked together. By the time he was 12, he could fix almost anything electronic from broken phones to glitchy laptops. But Marcus didn't stop there. Once he mastered fixing things, he started exploring bigger challenges. He learned coding, a skill that lets people write instructions for computers to follow. Coding isn't easy. It takes patience, creativity, and lots of practice. But Marcus was hooked. He spent hours every day practicing, experimenting, and teaching himself new tricks. Before long, he became really good at it. By the time Marcus turned 15, he wasn't just a hobbyist anymore. He was a true expert. Some people might call him a genius. He could create programs that solved real-world problems. He could protect computers from hackers. And he could uncover secrets hidden deep within digital systems. All of this, and no one outside his family even knew about it. So, why is Marcus in court today? What did he supposedly do to end up in front of Judge Grayson? The truth is, Marcus didn't break any laws. At least, not intentionally. What happened was a mix-up, a big misunderstanding caused by someone else's actions. But before we explain that, let's set the stage. A few weeks ago, Marcus was working late at night on his computer. He often stayed up late, diving deep into projects that excited him. That night, he decided to test a new program he'd been building. This program was designed to detect weaknesses in computer networks. Think of it like a security guard checking doors and windows to make sure nothing bad can get in. While running his program, Marcus noticed something strange. One of the systems he scanned, a government database, had a major flaw. Someone had left a backdoor open, which meant hackers could sneak in and steal information without anyone noticing. Marcus knew this was serious. If bad guys found the flaw, they could cause a lot of damage. Instead of ignoring it, Marcus reported the issue to the authorities. He sent an email explaining what he'd found and offered to help fix the problem. But here's the twist: instead of thanking him, the authorities accused him of hacking into the system himself. They thought he was the one causing trouble, not trying to prevent it. That's how Marcus ended up in court. He wasn't guilty of anything except trying to do the right thing. But now, he had to prove his innocence to a judge who already seemed to dislike him. Back to Judge Grayson. As he looked at Marcus, he saw only what he expected to see: a troubled teenager dressed in baggy clothes, sitting silently in a courtroom. To the judge, Marcus fit the stereotype of a bad kid. Someone who skipped school, broke rules, and caused headaches for everyone around him. Another graffiti artist, the judge muttered sarcastically, flipping through the papers in front of him. Or maybe shoplifting. Petty theft. His tone was dismissive, almost mocking. He didn't bother asking Marcus questions or giving him a chance to explain himself. Instead, he made assumptions based on appearances. And those assumptions couldn't have been further from the truth. What Judge Grayson didn't realize was that Marcus wasn't just a quiet teenager. He wasn't some troublemaker looking for attention. He was smart. Really smart. Smarter than most people in that room, including the judge himself. Have you ever heard the saying, "Don't judge a book by its cover"? It means you shouldn't decide what something or someone is like just by how they look on the outside. Sometimes, the most interesting stories are hidden beneath plain covers. And sometimes, the quietest people have the loudest voices when it matters most. That's exactly what was happening in that courtroom. Everyone, including Judge Grayson, underestimated Marcus. They judged him based on his hoodie, his sneakers, and his silence. They assumed he was guilty without hearing his side of the story. But Marcus wasn't worried. He knew the truth. And he knew that sooner or later, the truth would come out. Until then, he stayed calm and focused. He didn't argue or try to defend himself right away. He waited patiently, knowing that his moment would arrive. As the minutes ticked by, the tension in the courtroom grew thicker. People whispered to each other, wondering why Marcus was there. Some guessed he was involved in petty crimes. Others thought maybe he'd gotten into a fight at school. No one suspected the real reason, not even close. Meanwhile, Marcus kept his head down. He didn't look at anyone. He didn't react to the whispers or stares. He just sat there, breathing slowly and steadily, like a soldier preparing for battle. What was going through his mind? Was he scared? Angry? Determined? Probably a mix of all three. But Marcus didn't let his emotions show. He stayed composed, ready to face whatever came next. And then, finally, it was time. The bailiff called Marcus's name, and the room fell silent. All eyes turned to him as he stood up and walked toward the front. For the first time, Marcus raised his head and looked directly at Judge Grayson. The judge blinked, surprised by the intensity in Marcus's gaze. For a brief moment, he felt unsure, like maybe he'd misjudged this kid after all. But then he shook off the feeling and cleared his throat. "Mr. Johnson," the judge began, his voice stern. "Do you understand why you're here today?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." "Well," the judge pressed. "Care to explain yourself?" Marcus hesitated for a second. Then, in a clear, steady voice, he said, "I'm here because I tried to help. Not because I did anything wrong." The courtroom erupted into murmurs. Some people laughed nervously. Others exchanged skeptical glances. Even the defense attorney looked confused. But Marcus didn't flinch. He stood tall, meeting the judge's gaze without blinking. Deep down, he knew this was just the beginning. The real challenge was yet to come. At this point, you might be wondering, why should I keep watching this story? What makes Marcus's situation so special? Here's why: Marcus's story isn't just about proving his innocence. It's about showing the world that appearances can be deceiving. It's about standing up for what's right, even when everyone doubts you. And it's about using your talents to make a difference, no matter how hard things get. By the end of this story, you'll see Marcus transform from a quiet teenager into a hero. You'll watch him outsmart people who underestimate him. You'll cheer as he uncovers the truth and clears his name. And you'll learn an important lesson about judging others too quickly. But before we get to all that, we need to dig deeper into the conflict. We need to explore how Marcus handles the accusations against him. And we need to discover the secrets he's hiding, secrets that will shock everyone in the courtroom. Before we move on, I want to ask you something: have you ever been misunderstood or judged unfairly? Maybe someone thought you couldn't do something because of how you looked or acted. If that's happened to you, share your story in the comments below. Let's talk about how it feels to be underestimated and how you proved them wrong. Let's go back to that courtroom. Remember how Judge Grayson was already annoyed with Marcus? Well, things were about to get worse for both of them. Judge Grayson leaned back in his big leather chair. His face showed exactly how he felt: angry, frustrated, and maybe even a little bored. He looked at Marcus like he was looking at a bug he wanted to squash. "So, Mr. Johnson," he began, his voice sharp and cold, "do you even understand why you're here today?" Marcus didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked up for just a moment. His dark eyes met the judge's for a split second before dropping again. Then, very slowly, He nodded his head. It was almost too small to notice, but it was there, a tiny nod. "Oh, great," the judge sneered. His tone was dripping with sarcasm. "A man of few words. Perfect. Just what I needed, a silent troublemaker." The room stayed quiet for a moment. Everyone was watching Marcus, waiting to see what he would do next. Would he speak? Would he defend himself? Or would he stay quiet like the judge expected? Then, the prosecutor stepped in. The prosecutor is the person whose job it is to prove that someone is guilty. In this case, the prosecutor was trying to make Marcus look bad. He stood up and said loudly, "Your Honor, this young man has been accused of hacking into multiple government systems. It's serious stuff. We believe he may have ties to organized cybercrime. If you don't know what hacking means, it's when someone breaks into computers or systems they're not supposed to access. And organized cybercrime is when groups of people work together to commit crimes using computers. These are big accusations, things that sound really scary and dangerous." When the prosecutor said those words, the whole courtroom reacted. Some people gasped. Others whispered to their neighbors. A few even laughed nervously, like they couldn't believe what they were hearing. At this point, Marcus finally spoke. His voice was soft but steady. He didn't shout or raise his tone. He simply said, "I didn't do anything wrong." You might think that would be enough to calm everyone down. But instead, the courtroom erupted in murmurs again. People started talking among themselves, shaking their heads, or rolling their eyes. Even Marcus's own defense attorney, the person who was supposed to help him, seemed unsure whether to take him seriously. Why did they react this way? Well, think about it. Marcus was just a teenager. A quiet, unassuming teenager wearing an oversized hoodie and scuffed sneakers. How could someone like him possibly hack into government systems? It sounded impossible. Most people in the room probably thought Marcus was lying or making excuses. But deep down, Marcus knew something they didn't. Something big. Something that would change everything. Let's pause for a moment and talk about why people doubted Marcus so much. Why didn't they believe him when he said he didn't do anything wrong? First, there's the way Marcus looked. As we've already mentioned, he wasn't dressed like someone who belonged in court. His hoodie was too big, his sneakers were old, and his posture made him seem shy or scared. To many people, these things suggested that Marcus wasn't important or trustworthy. Second, there's the fact that Marcus was quiet. In situations like this, people often expect loud, dramatic reactions. They want to hear excuses or explanations. When someone stays calm and doesn't argue back, it can make others think they're hiding something. Finally, there's the nature of the accusation itself. Hacking into government systems sounds like something only super smart, highly skilled adults could do. The idea that a teenager, even a smart one, could pull it off seemed far-fetched to most people. All of these factors combined made it easy for the prosecutor, the judge, and everyone else in the room to dismiss Marcus as guilty without giving him a fair chance. Now, let's talk about what was really going on. Because while everyone else was busy judging Marcus, the truth was much more complicated. Remember how we mentioned earlier that Marcus loved working with computers? That wasn't just a hobby for him, it was his passion. He spent hours every day learning new skills, solving problems, and exploring how technology worked. By the time he was 15, Marcus was already better at coding and cybersecurity than most adults. A few weeks before this trial, Marcus had discovered something alarming. While testing a program he'd built to detect weaknesses in computer networks, he found a major flaw in a government database. Someone had left a backdoor open, which meant hackers could sneak in and steal sensitive information without anyone noticing. Instead of ignoring the problem, Marcus decided to report it. He sent an email to the authorities explaining what he'd found and offered to help fix the issue. But instead of thanking him, the authorities accused him of causing the problem himself. They thought he was the hacker, not the helper. That's why Marcus was in court. Not because he'd done something wrong, but because he'd tried to do something right. And now, he had to prove his innocence to people who refused to listen. Judge Grayson wasn't convinced by Marcus's calm response. In fact, he seemed even more irritated. The judge leaned forward in his chair, resting his elbows on the desk. His eyes narrowed as he stared at Marcus like a teacher scolding a student. "Mr. Johnson," the judge said sharply, "if you didn't do anything wrong, then why are we here? Why did the authorities accuse you of hacking into government systems?" Marcus hesitated for a moment. He took a deep breath before answering. "I reported a security flaw," he said quietly. "I was trying to help." The courtroom buzzed again. Some people whispered to each other, shaking their heads in disbelief. Others smirked, clearly thinking Marcus was lying. Even the defense attorney glanced at him with doubt in her eyes. "A security flaw?" Judge Grayson repeated, raising an eyebrow. His tone was mocking, like he didn't believe a word Marcus was saying. "And you expect us to believe that a teenager not even old enough to vote found a flaw in a government system?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge sighed loudly, shaking his head. "This is ridiculous," he muttered under his breath. Then, turning to the prosecutor, he added, "Let's get on with it. Show me your evidence." The prosecutor stood up confidently, holding a folder filled with papers. He walked to the front of the room and placed the folder on the judge's desk. "Your Honor," he began, "we have strong evidence linking this defendant to unauthorized access of classified government databases." He turned to face the courtroom, making sure everyone could see him. "Not only did Mr. Johnson hack into these systems, but he also attempted to cover his tracks using advanced techniques. This isn't the work of an amateur, it's the work of someone highly skilled." At this point, the prosecutor pulled out a stack of printed screenshots. He held them up for everyone to see. "These logs show the IP address used to access the databases. And guess what? It matches the defendant's home computer." The crowd murmured again. Some people looked shocked, while others nodded, agreeing with the prosecutor. Even Marcus's own defense attorney frowned, flipping through her notes nervously. But Marcus didn't react. He stayed calm, keeping his hands folded in his lap. His expression didn't change, even as the prosecutor continued to pile on accusations. "This isn't just a harmless prank," the prosecutor went on. "Unauthorized access to government systems is a federal crime. If left unchecked, it could lead to national security risks. We cannot allow individuals like Mr. Johnson to operate freely." The words hung heavy in the air. To most people in the room, it sounded like the prosecutor had made a solid case. The evidence seemed clear-cut. How could Marcus possibly deny it? While everyone else reacted to the prosecutor's claims, Marcus remained silent. He didn't argue or try to defend himself right away. Instead, he listened carefully, taking in every word. Why didn't Marcus speak up? Was he scared? Confused? Or was he planning something? The truth is, Marcus knew the prosecutor's case wasn't as strong as it appeared. Those screenshots? They weren't proof of guilt, they were proof of something else entirely. Something the prosecutor didn't understand. But Marcus wasn't ready to reveal that yet. He needed to wait for the right moment. For now, he stayed quiet, letting the tension build. As the prosecutor wrapped up his presentation, the crowd grew restless. People whispered to each other, sharing their thoughts about Marcus and the case. One man sitting near the back muttered, "Looks guilty to me. Kids these days think they can get away with anything." A woman next to him nodded. "Yeah, and look at him. Sitting there like he doesn't care. Probably thinks he's smarter than all of us." Even the reporters scribbling notes in the corner seemed skeptical. their headlines would likely paint Marcus as a dangerous hacker, a threat to society. But not everyone was convinced. A few people in the room noticed something different about Marcus. They saw how calm he was, how steady his gaze remained despite the accusations flying at him. These observers wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was more to the story. Meanwhile, Marcus's defense attorney was struggling. She was a young lawyer named Ms. Carter, still early in her career. This was her first big case, and she wasn't sure how to handle it. Ms. Carter glanced at Marcus, hoping he'd give her some kind of signal, a clue about how to proceed. But Marcus just sat there, his face unreadable. Frustrated, she turned back to the judge. "Your Honor," she began hesitantly, "my client maintains his innocence. While the prosecution has presented technical evidence, I urge the court to consider alternative explanations before jumping to conclusions." Her voice wavered slightly, betraying her lack of confidence. Judge Grayson raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Alternative explanations," he echoed. "Such as?" Ms. Carter hesitated. She didn't have a clear answer. Without more information from Marcus, she couldn't mount a strong defense. All she could do was stall for time. I need to review the evidence further," she admitted. "Perhaps consult with an expert on cybersecurity." The judge sighed again, clearly losing patience. "Fine," he said curtly. "We'll adjourn for now. Court will reconvene tomorrow morning." With that, the session ended. The bailiff called for order, and the crowd began to file out of the room. Marcus stood up slowly, his expression unchanged. As he walked past the prosecutor, the man smirked, clearly thinking he'd already won. Now that the first day of the trial is over, you might be wondering, what happens next? Will Marcus finally speak up and explain himself? Will the truth come out, or will the prosecutor succeed in convincing everyone that Marcus is guilty? Here's a hint: Marcus isn't done yet. Not by a long shot. He knows the prosecutor's case has holes in it, holes that he plans to expose when the time is right. But for now, he's biding his time, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Let's go back to the courtroom. The trial was moving forward, but something strange was happening. Marcus, the quiet teenager everyone doubted, wasn't acting like a guilty person. Instead, he was calm, too calm. And that made people curious. Judge Grayson was growing more irritated by the minute. Every time he asked Marcus a question, he expected anger, panic, or at least some kind of reaction. But Marcus didn't give him any of those things. Instead, his answers were calm and measured. He spoke softly, but his words carried weight. It was like he had a secret and he wasn't afraid to hint at it. "Do you deny accessing these classified files?" the prosecutor demanded, slamming a folder onto the desk. His voice was loud, almost shouting, as if he wanted to scare Marcus into confessing. Marcus didn't flinch. He looked straight at the prosecutor and replied simply, "Yes." The room went quiet for a moment. Everyone waited to see what Marcus would say next. Then, after a pause, he added, "But if I had accessed them, I'd tell you exactly how I did it." You could hear a pin drop in the courtroom. Was this a bluff? Was Marcus just trying to sound smart? Or was he daring to challenge the entire system? The prosecutor frowned. He didn't know what to make of Marcus's answer. Neither did the judge. Even the spectators leaned forward in their seats, whispering to each other. Who was this kid? Why wasn't he scared? And most importantly, what secrets was he hiding? While the trial continued inside, whispers spread outside the courtroom. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, trying to figure out who Marcus really was. Spectators gathered in small groups, sharing theories about the mysterious teen. Some thought Marcus was lying. They believed he was guilty and just pretending to be innocent. Others weren't so sure. They noticed how calm he was, how confident he seemed despite the accusations against him. A few even started to wonder if just maybe Marcus was telling the truth. One reporter muttered, "He doesn't act like someone who's guilty." Guilty people usually get nervous or try to explain themselves too much. But this kid? He's different. Another nodded. Yeah, and did you hear what he said about the security systems? That was bold. The prosecutor's team overheard these conversations and tried to brush them off. It's just a game, one of them said. He's trying to confuse everyone. But deep down, they weren't so sure. Something about Marcus felt off. Like he knew something they didn't. Back inside the courtroom, the prosecutor kept asking questions. He showed more evidence, screenshots, logs, and technical details, all pointing to Marcus's supposed guilt. But Marcus stayed calm. He listened carefully, nodding occasionally, but never losing his composure. Then, during cross-examination, Marcus dropped another clue. The prosecutor asked, "If you're innocent, then why does all the evidence point to you?" Marcus tilted his head slightly, like he was thinking about the question. Then he said, "You might want to check your own security systems. They're not as safe as you think." The prosecutor scoffed. "Is that supposed to scare us?" he asked, smirking. Marcus smiled faintly. "Not scare you," he said. "Warn you." The courtroom erupted into murmurs again. What did Marcus mean by that? Was he threatening them? Or was he hinting at something bigger? The judge banged his gavel, calling for order. "Enough of this nonsense," he snapped. "Stick to the facts, Mr. Johnson." But Marcus's words lingered in the air. People couldn't stop thinking about them. What did he know about the security systems? And why was he warning the prosecutor instead of defending himself? By now, curiosity was building not just in the courtroom, but also in the minds of the viewers watching this unfold. If you were there, you'd probably have a million questions. What was Marcus capable of? Why did he keep dropping hints without fully explaining himself? And most importantly, how was he going to prove his innocence? Let's take a moment to think about this. Imagine you're in Marcus's shoes. You've been accused of something you didn't do. Everyone thinks you're guilty, and they're using evidence to prove it. What would you do? Would you panic? Argue? Try to explain yourself? Marcus chose a different path. Instead of fighting back right away, he stayed calm and planted seeds of doubt. He hinted at bigger truths without revealing everything. It was like he was playing chess, thinking several moves ahead of everyone else. So, why did Marcus stay so calm? Why didn't he yell or argue when people accused him of hacking? There are a few reasons. First, Marcus knew the truth. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong. And because of that, he didn't feel the need to defend himself constantly. He trusted that the truth would come out eventually. Second, Marcus understood something important: staying calm makes people curious. When someone is quiet and confident, it makes others wonder what they're hiding. It creates suspense. And in a situation like this, suspense can work in your favor. Finally, Marcus had a plan. He wasn't just sitting there waiting for things to happen. He was observing, listening, and preparing for the right moment to strike. That's why he kept dropping hints, small clues that would lead to bigger revelations later. As the trial went on, the prosecutor started to feel uneasy. At first, he was confident. He thought the evidence against Marcus was solid. But now, he wasn't so sure. Every time Marcus spoke, the prosecutor felt a chill run down his spine. Those calm answers, those cryptic warnings, it was like Marcus was playing a game, and the prosecutor was falling into his trap. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, turning to the judge, "I request a recess. We need to review the evidence further." The judge raised an eyebrow. Why? You've presented your case. What more do you need? The prosecutor hesitated. He didn't want to admit that he was unsure. Instead, he said, "To ensure accuracy, Your Honor. This is a serious matter." The judge sighed and agreed. "Fine. Court will reconvene tomorrow morning." With that, the session ended. The bailiff called for order, and the crowd began to file out of the room. Marcus stood up slowly, his expression unchanged. As he walked past the prosecutor, the man avoided his gaze, clearly unsettled. Now that the second day of the trial is over, you might be wondering, what happens next? Will Marcus finally reveal his secrets? Will the prosecutor find new evidence to support his claims? Or will the truth come out in a way no one expects? Here's a hint: Marcus isn't done yet. Not by a long shot. He knows the prosecutor's case has holes in it, holes that he plans to expose when the time is right. But for now, he's biding his time, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. After the recess, the prosecutor spent hours reviewing the evidence. He went over every detail, double-checking the logs, the screenshots, and the technical reports. At first glance, everything seemed solid. The IP address linked to Marcus's home computer. The timestamps matched the times of the alleged hacking attempts. On paper, it looked like an open and shut case. But something about Marcus's calm confidence kept nagging at the prosecutor. Why wasn't the boy panicking? Why did he seem so sure of himself? And what did he mean when he said, "You might want to check your own security systems"? The prosecutor decided to dig deeper. He called in a team of cybersecurity experts to analyze the evidence again. Maybe they could find something he had missed. After all, if Marcus really was as smart as he seemed, there was a chance he had outsmarted them all. Meanwhile, back at the courthouse, rumors were spreading like wildfire. Reporters couldn't stop talking about Marcus. Some called him a genius hacker. Others thought he was just a quiet kid caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. But one thing was clear: everyone wanted to know more about him. While the prosecutor scrambled to strengthen his case, Marcus stayed focused. He knew exactly what he was doing. Every word he spoke, every hint he dropped, it was all part of his plan. Let's take a moment to understand Marcus's strategy. Imagine you're playing hide and seek. You don't just run around shouting, "Here I am." Instead, you stay quiet, letting the other players come closer before revealing yourself. That's what Marcus was doing. He was luring the prosecutor into a false sense of security, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Marcus also knew something the prosecutor didn't: the evidence against him wasn't real. Someone had planted fake logs and manipulated the data to frame him. It was a clever trick, one that most people wouldn't notice. But Marcus wasn't most people. He'd been studying cybersecurity for years, and he could spot a fake from a mile away. So, while the prosecutor worked to build a stronger case, Marcus prepared to dismantle it. He gathered notes, reviewed his own findings, and rehearsed what he would say when the time came. He was ready. On the third day of the trial, the prosecutor introduced a new witness, a cybersecurity expert named Dr. Emily Carter. She was a tall woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. Her job was to explain the technical details of the case to the judge and jury. Dr. Carter walked to the front of the room and began her testimony. She talked about firewalls, encryption, and digital footprints. Most of the people in the courtroom didn't understand half of what she was saying, but they nodded along anyway, pretending to follow. Based on the evidence, Dr. Carter concluded, it is clear that the defendant accessed classified government systems using advanced techniques. This level of skill suggests professional involvement. The prosecutor smiled smugly. Finally, someone who could back up his claims. But Marcus didn't look worried. In fact, he seemed almost bored. When it was his turn to question Dr. Carter, Marcus stood up slowly. He walked to the front of the room, his hands clasped behind his back. Then, in a calm voice, he asked, "Dr. Carter, how do you know the logs weren't tampered with?" Dr. Carter blinked, surprised by the question. "Tampered with," she repeated. "That's highly unlikely. Our systems are secure." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "Highly unlikely isn't the same as impossible," he pointed out. "Have you checked for signs of IP spoofing?" The courtroom fell silent. People exchanged confused glances. What was IP spoofing? Was Marcus making things up, or did he actually know what he was talking about? Dr. Carter hesitated. IP spoofing is a possibility, she admitted reluctantly. But detecting it requires specialized tools and expertise. Marcus smiled faintly. "Good thing I brought my laptop, then." Before anyone could react, Marcus pulled a small laptop from his bag. He set it on the table and opened it. With a few quick keystrokes, he connected to the courtroom's projector system. A screen lit up at the front of the room, displaying lines of code scrolling across the display. "This is your evidence," Marcus explained, pointing to the data. "Except it's fake. Someone planted it using a technique called IP spoofing. If you trace the actual source," he hit enter, and a new set of coordinates appeared. "You'll find it leads straight to your office, Prosecutor Reynolds." The room erupted into chaos. People gasped, shouted, and pointed fingers. Prosecutor Reynolds turned pale, stammering denials while Judge Grayson stared at Marcus, his face a mix of shock and disbelief. For the first time in his career, the prosecutor realized he'd been outsmarted. And not just by anyone, by a teenager. You might be wondering, why did Marcus wait so long to reveal this information? Why didn't he show everyone the truth right away? There's a simple answer: timing. Marcus knew that dropping hints and building suspense would make his eventual reveal even more impactful. If he had shown the laptop evidence on the first day, people might have dismissed it as a coincidence or a mistake. But by waiting until the prosecutor thought he had won, Marcus ensured that his revelation would hit like a bombshell. It was a brilliant move, one that proved Marcus wasn't just smart, he was strategic. As the courtroom buzzed with excitement, the crowd couldn't stop talking about Marcus. Reporters scrambled to update their stories, calling him everything from a teenage prodigy to a cybersecurity wizard. Spectators cheered, clapping for the boy who had turned the tables on his accusers. Even Judge Grayson, who had started the trial by mocking Marcus, now looked at him with newfound respect. "Mr. Johnson," he said, his tone much softer than before, "I must admit, I underestimated you. Clearly, you are not the person we thought you were." Marcus nodded politely. "Thank you, Your Honor. I hope this shows that appearances can be deceiving." Now that Marcus has revealed the truth, you might think the story is over. But it's not. There's still more to come. Who framed Marcus? Why did they do it? And how will the authorities handle the fallout from this shocking discovery? Stay tuned, because the answers are coming. But first, let's reflect on what we've learned so far. The trial had been going on for days, and tensions were high. Everyone in the courtroom was waiting to see what would happen next. Would Marcus be found guilty? Or would he somehow prove his innocence? Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, the prosecution's big reveal. The prosecutor stood up confidently, holding a stack of papers and a folder filled with screenshots. He walked to the front of the room and placed the folder on the judge's desk. "Your Honor," he began, his voice loud and clear, "this is undeniable proof of the defendant's guilt." He turned to face the courtroom, holding up the screenshots for everyone to see. "These logs show the IP address used to access classified government systems. And guess what? It matches the defendant's home computer." The crowd gasped. Some people whispered nervously, while others nodded, agreeing with the prosecutor. To most people in the room, this seemed like solid evidence. How could Marcus deny it now? But instead of panicking or arguing, Marcus did something unexpected. He stood up slowly, his posture straighter than before. His voice grew louder and clearer, catching everyone's attention. "Your Honor," Marcus said, addressing the judge directly, "may I approach the stand?" Judge Grayson looked surprised. He hesitated for a moment, then waved Marcus forward. "Make it quick," he said, clearly skeptical. Marcus walked to the front of the room, pulling a small laptop from his bag. He set it on the table and opened it. With a few swift keystrokes, he connected to the courtroom's projector system. A screen lit up at the front of the room, displaying lines of code scrolling across the display. Everyone watched in stunned silence. No one spoke. No one moved. All eyes were glued to the screen as Marcus began to explain. "This is your evidence," Marcus said, pointing to the data on the screen. His tone was calm but firm. "Except it's fake. Someone planted it using a technique called IP spoofing." The crowd murmured again. Some people looked confused. Others leaned forward, eager to hear more. What was IP spoofing? And how did Marcus know about it? Marcus continued, his voice steady. IP spoofing is when someone tricks a system into thinking an action came from a different computer. It's like forging a letter and making it look like it came from someone else. He paused for effect, letting his words sink in. Then, with a few more keystrokes, he traced the source of the fake logs. A new set of coordinates appeared on the screen. "If you trace the actual source," Marcus said, hitting enter dramatically, "you'll find it leads straight to your office, Prosecutor Reynolds." The room exploded into chaos. People gasped, shouted, and pointed fingers. Prosecutor Reynolds turned pale, stammering denials. "That's impossible," he shouted, shaking his head. "This is some kind of trick." But Marcus didn't back down. He kept his gaze steady, looking directly at the prosecutor. "It's not a trick," he said firmly. "It's the truth." Judge Grayson stared at Marcus, his face a mix of shock and disbelief. For the first time in his career, he found himself speechless. The evidence that had seemed so solid just moments ago was now crumbling before his eyes. With the courtroom still buzzing, Marcus took a deep breath and continued. "And as for me," he said, his tone unwavering, "I'm not a hacker. I'm a cybersecurity expert. My company works with governments worldwide to protect sensitive information." The crowd fell silent again. People exchanged wide-eyed glances, trying to process what they were hearing. A quiet, unassuming teenager was claiming to be a professional cybersecurity expert. "I was investigating a breach when your team arrested me," Marcus explained. "I reported the flaw to the authorities, hoping they would fix it. Instead, they accused me of causing the problem myself." Now it all made sense. The calm confidence, the cryptic warnings, the hints about security systems. It wasn't arrogance or bluffing. It was knowledge. Marcus knew exactly what he was talking about because he was an expert. As Marcus finished speaking, the room erupted into chaos once again. Reporters scrambled to update their stories, calling Marcus everything from a teenage prodigy to a cybersecurity wizard. Spectators cheered, clapping for the boy who had turned the tables on his accusers. Even Judge Grayson, who had started the trial by mocking Marcus, now looked at him with newfound respect. "Mr. Johnson," he said, his tone much softer than before, "I must admit, I underestimated you. Clearly, you are not the person we thought you were." Marcus nodded politely. "Thank you, Your Honor. I hope this shows that appearances can be deceiving." So, why did Marcus succeed where others might have failed? There are a few key reasons. First, Marcus stayed calm under pressure. When everyone else expected him to panic or argue, he remained composed. This made people curious and gave him the upper hand. Second, Marcus was patient. He didn't rush to reveal the truth right away. Instead, he waited for the perfect moment to strike, ensuring his revelation would have the biggest impact. Finally, Marcus was prepared. He had gathered evidence, reviewed his findings, and rehearsed what he would say. He knew exactly what he was doing every step of the way. These qualities, calmness, patience, and preparation, are what made Marcus's victory possible. Meanwhile, Prosecutor Reynolds was falling apart. The man who had entered the courtroom confident and smug now looked defeated. His face was pale, his hands trembled, and his voice cracked as he tried to defend himself. This is outrageous," he stammered. "There must be some mistake." But no one believed him anymore. The evidence Marcus had presented was too strong, too clear. Even the judge turned to him with a stern expression. "Mr. Reynolds," Judge Grayson said sharply, "you will explain yourself immediately." Reynolds opened his mouth to respond but couldn't find the words. Instead, he sank into his chair, staring at the floor in shame. "Now that Marcus has revealed the truth, you might think the story is over. But it's not. There's still more to come. Who framed Marcus? Why did they do it? And how will the authorities handle the fallout from this shocking discovery?" After Marcus revealed the truth in court, everything changed. The trial that had started with accusations against a quiet teenager ended with shocking discoveries about corruption within the justice system itself. In the days that followed, investigators worked hard to uncover the full story. What they found was worse than anyone could have imagined. Prosecutor Reynolds wasn't just guilty of framing Marcus, he was involved in much bigger crimes. It turned out he had been using his position to cover up illegal activities. He and a group of hackers had been stealing sensitive information from government systems and selling it for money. When Marcus discovered their security flaw and reported it, Reynolds panicked. To protect himself, he decided to frame Marcus, hoping no one would suspect a teenager of being innocent. But Marcus's cleverness ruined their plan. By exposing the fake evidence and tracing it back to Reynolds, Marcus not only cleared his name but also brought down a dangerous criminal network. Once the investigators dug deeper, they uncovered even more shocking details. Prosecutor Reynolds wasn't working alone. He had partners, other people in powerful positions who helped him carry out his schemes. These included corrupt officials, dishonest lawyers, and even some tech experts who knew how to manipulate computer systems. One by one, these individuals were arrested. News outlets covered the story non-stop, calling it one of the biggest scandals in recent history. People were shocked to learn how deep the corruption went. Many wondered how such a thing could happen without anyone noticing sooner. For Marcus, this part of the story was bittersweet. On one hand, he was glad the truth had come out. On the other hand, he felt sad that so many people had abused their power. He knew that trust in the justice system would take time to rebuild. As news of Marcus's actions spread, he became an overnight sensation. Reporters called him a hero. Social media was flooded with posts praising him for standing up to injustice. Even kids at school who once ignored him or teased him now looked at him with admiration. Marcus didn't let the attention go to his head, though. He stayed humble, just like he always had. When reporters asked him how he felt about becoming famous, he simply shrugged. "I didn't do this for attention," he said. "I did it because it was the right thing to do." People respected him even more for that. They saw that Marcus wasn't interested in fame or glory. All he wanted was to make things fair and help others. Meanwhile, Judge Grayson had a lot to think about. At the start of the trial, he had judged Marcus unfairly, assuming he was guilty based on how he looked and acted. But now, after seeing the truth, the judge realized how wrong he had been. A few days after the trial ended, Judge Grayson issued a public apology. He held a press conference where he admitted his mistakes and praised Marcus for his bravery and intelligence. "I owe Mr. Johnson an apology," the judge said, looking directly into the cameras. "I underestimated him, and I allowed my biases to cloud my judgment. That was wrong, and I deeply regret it." The apology made headlines, but it didn't completely erase the embarrassment of his earlier behavior. Many people still criticized the judge for being too quick to judge Marcus. However, others appreciated his honesty and willingness to admit his faults. For Marcus, the apology meant a lot. It showed him that even people in powerful positions can learn and grow. And while he forgave the judge, he also hoped this experience would teach others not to judge someone too quickly. Would you forgive someone if they apologized for treating you unfairly? Let us know in the comments below. With the trial behind him, Marcus returned to his life, but not exactly the way it was before. Now, everyone knew who he was and what he was capable of. Instead of blending into the background, he became a role model for young people everywhere. Marcus went back to his work in cybersecurity, but with renewed determination. He vowed to use his skills to help those who couldn't fight back on their own. Whether it was protecting people from hackers or teaching others how to stay safe online, Marcus dedicated himself to making the world a better place. He also started speaking at schools and community events. Kids loved hearing his story, especially when he talked about staying calm under pressure and believing in yourself. "You don't have to be loud to be strong," he often said. "Sometimes, the quietest voices are the ones worth listening to." His message inspired countless people. Teachers reported that students were more confident after hearing Marcus speak. Parents thanked him for showing their children that it's okay to be different and that intelligence is a superpower. The whole experience taught Marcus and everyone else important lessons about fairness, courage, and the dangers of judging others too quickly. First, it showed that appearances can be deceiving. Just because someone looks quiet or ordinary doesn't mean they aren't special. Marcus proved that true strength comes from inside, not from how you look on the outside. Second, it reminded everyone that justice isn't always easy to achieve. Sometimes, the truth takes time to come out. But if you stay patient and keep fighting, good can win over bad. Finally, it highlighted the importance of standing up for what's right even when it's hard. Marcus could have given up when everyone doubted him. But instead, he kept going, trusting that the truth would eventually shine through. What lesson do you think is most important from Marcus's story? Share your thoughts in the comments. The scandal involving Prosecutor Reynolds and his partners led to big changes in the justice system. New rules were put in place to prevent similar incidents from happening again. Judges, lawyers, and investigators received training on how to avoid bias and handle cases fairly. Some people argued that the changes weren't enough. They believed the entire system needed to be rebuilt from scratch. Others thought the reforms were a good start. Either way, everyone agreed that something had to change. Marcus played a small role in these discussions. Though he wasn't an expert on law or policy, his story inspired lawmakers to take action. They knew that if a teenager could expose such a major problem, then adults should be able to fix it. Looking ahead, Marcus had big dreams. He wanted to start his own company, a place where young people could learn about technology and use it to solve real-world problems. He envisioned a team of talented kids working together to protect governments, businesses, and communities from cyber threats. "I want to show people that age doesn't matter," Marcus said during an interview. "What matters is what you do with the skills you have." Many companies offered to partner with him, but Marcus took his time deciding. He wanted to make sure any partnership aligned with his values. For now, he focused on finishing school and continuing his work in cybersecurity. Let's take a moment to think about everything we've learned from Marcus's story. At first glance, Marcus seemed like an ordinary teenager, quiet, unassuming, and easy to overlook. But as the trial unfolded, we discovered that he was anything but ordinary. Beneath his calm exterior lay incredible intelligence, courage, and determination. Marcus taught us that true strength isn't always loud or flashy. Sometimes, it's hidden beneath layers of patience, resilience, and quiet brilliance. Think about it, when someone is loud or bold, we tend to notice them right away. We might assume they're strong or confident because they stand out. But what about the people who stay quiet? The ones who don't seek attention or try to impress others. Often, these are the people with the most to offer. They're the ones who listen carefully, think deeply, and act wisely when the time is right. Marcus proved this over and over again. He didn't shout or argue when people doubted him. Instead, he stayed calm and focused, trusting that the truth would come out eventually. And when the moment arrived, he revealed his hidden talents in a way that shocked everyone. His quiet confidence turned out to be his greatest strength. One of the biggest lessons from Marcus's story is that appearances can be deceiving. Just because someone looks or acts a certain way doesn't mean that's who they really are. People often judge others based on their clothes, their behavior, or even their silence. But those things don't tell the whole story. For example, remember how Judge Grayson dismissed Marcus at the start of the trial? The judge saw Marcus's hoodie, his scuffed sneakers, and his quiet demeanor and immediately assumed he was guilty. He didn't take the time to learn more about Marcus or consider that there might be another side to the story. We all do this sometimes. Maybe you've met someone who seemed shy or awkward and thought they weren't very smart or talented. Or maybe you've seen someone dressed casually and assumed they weren't important. These kinds of judgments happen every day, but they're not fair. The truth is, you never really know what someone is capable of until you give them a chance. Marcus's story reminds us to look beyond appearances. The next time you meet someone who seems ordinary, take a closer look. You might discover that they're extraordinary in ways you can't imagine. Another important lesson from Marcus's journey is the power of patience and resilience. Life isn't always easy, especially when people misunderstand or underestimate you. But giving up won't solve anything. Sometimes, the best thing you can do is wait for the right moment to show your true self. Marcus faced a lot of challenges during the trial. Everyone from the prosecutor to the spectators doubted him. They thought he was guilty, lazy, or foolish. But Marcus didn't let their opinions bring him down. Instead, he stayed patient and kept his focus on the bigger picture. He knew that proving his innocence wasn't just about clearing his name, it was about exposing the truth and making things right. Resilience means bouncing back from tough situations and refusing to give up, no matter how hard things get. It's about believing in yourself, even when others don't. Marcus showed us that resilience isn't about being fearless, it's about being brave enough to keep going, even when you're scared or unsure. Can you think of a time when you had to be patient or resilient? Maybe you worked hard on a project that didn't turn out the way you wanted, or maybe you stood up for yourself when someone treated you unfairly. If you've ever felt like giving up but pushed through anyway, you already know how powerful patience and resilience can be. Marcus also taught us the importance of standing up for what's right even when it's hard. When he discovered the security flaw in the government system, he could have ignored it. After all, it wasn't his job to fix the problem. But instead, he chose to report it, knowing it was the right thing to do. Standing up for what's right isn't always easy. Sometimes, it means going against the crowd or facing criticism. Other times, it means taking risks or making sacrifices. But in the end, doing the right thing is always worth it. It helps make the world a better place, one small action at a time. Marcus's decision to report the flaw led to a difficult trial, but it also exposed corruption and protected countless people from harm. His actions remind us that even small choices can have big impacts. Whether it's speaking up for someone who's being treated unfairly or helping a friend in need, standing up for what's right makes a difference. What's something you've done recently to stand up for what's right? Share your story in the comments below. Let's inspire each other to keep making positive changes. Here's a fun fact: some of the most amazing people in history were quiet and unassuming. Think about inventors, scientists, and artists who changed the world without seeking fame or attention. Their quiet brilliance allowed them to focus on their work and create incredible things. MOCKS reminded us that the quietest person in the room is often the one holding all the cards. They might not say much, but when they do speak, their words carry weight. They might not draw attention to themselves, but their actions leave a lasting impact. So the next time you're in a group setting, pay attention to the quiet ones. Listen to what they have to say. You might be surprised by how much wisdom and insight they share. Now it's your turn to reflect. Think about the people in your life. Is there someone who surprised you with their hidden talents or strength? Maybe it's a family member who suddenly showed a skill you didn't know they had. Or maybe it's a classmate who stepped up in a way you didn't expect. Share their story in the comments below. Tell us who they are, what they did, and why it inspired you. By sharing these stories, we can celebrate the quiet heroes in our lives and remind ourselves that greatness comes in many forms. As we wrap up MOCKS's story, let's remember the lessons he taught us. 1. Appearances can be deceiving. Don't judge someone too quickly. Take the time to learn more about them. 2. Patience and resilience are powerful. Keep going, even when things are tough. Good things come to those who wait. 3. Stand up for what's right. Even small actions can make a big difference. 4. The quietest voices are often the strongest. Pay attention to the people around you. You never know what they're capable of. MOCKS may have been underestimated at first, but he proved that true strength comes from within. His story inspires us to believe in ourselves and others, no matter how things seem on the surface. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope MOCKS's story has inspired you to see the world and the people in it in a new light. Keep shining, and don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below.